Sir, could you be my daddy just for one day? An innocent question at a grocery store changed 3 lives forever. A little girl without a father, a single mother who thought she'd missed every chance, and a man who had lost his entire family, never letting anyone into his heart again. From one unexpected yes to a tearful courtroom moment where the little girl stood up and said, "I've already chosen my daddy." From nights with high fevers to silent living room dances with no music. This family wasn't born from blood. It was built one choice at a time. If you believe that sometimes a single hand to hold can begin to heal a broken heart, then stay with this story. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any heartwarming stories like this. Because maybe, just maybe, one small moment today is all it takes to warm your heart. It was a weekday morning, just like any other, when Ethan Grant stepped into the corner grocery store where he often stopped for mineral water after his early meetings. His dark tailored suit fit perfectly. His stride was sharp, his gaze cold. People often said he wore the face of a man long reconciled with loneliness. He didn't smile and he didn't need to. In a world of numbers and dashboards, he was always on time, always on task, and never let emotions interfere. He placed the bottle on the counter, his voice low but clear. "I asked for still water." The young cashier stammered an apology, her hands trembling as she flipped the receipt. But Ethan didn't get angry. He merely glanced at his watch and tugged at the cuff of his sleeve behind him. The line began to stir, sighs, impatient glances, a few quiet shakes of the head. But he didn't care. In a world where time was money, delays were unacceptable. Then a small voice, pure and bright, rose behind him, so honest it seemed to cut straight through the noise. "Mister, could you be my daddy?" Just for one day, Ethan turned. Just a few steps away stood a little girl about 6 years old with curly blonde hair, soft as buttered popcorn, wearing a pale pink hoodie, frayed at the hem. Her socks didn't match. Her sneakers were worn thin. And her eyes, God, those eyes, deep blue like Lake Michigan on a windless day. Her gaze didn't waver, didn't flinch. She looked at him as if she had already chosen him. A woman rushed over, face flushed with worry, pulling the girl close. "Lily, you can't go running off like that." She looked up and met his eyes. Her hair was hastily tied in a braid. Her cream-colored coat faded with age. Her voice was tired but trying to stay polite. I'm so sorry. She says all sorts of things. She didn't mean." "Yes, I did," Lily interrupted, her tone firm but gentle. "Tomorrow is Father's Day at school and everyone's bringing their dad. I don't have one, but I thought maybe you could help." Ethan stood still. In that moment, the city's noise vanished. Everything paused as if he were standing between two worlds, one of reason and one of feelings he'd buried for years. And for some reason, for some unknown reason, he heard himself say, voice low and soft. The woman stood on the edge between apology and embarrassment. She gently wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders, her hand resting there, trembling slightly, as if she too were caught between duty and a quiet, unnamed shame. "I'm Rachel," she said, her voice low and hoarse from what must have been an already too long morning. "I'm a part-time librarian at the neighborhood library, and I work evenings at Maple Street Cafe near 9th. Ethan nodded. His gaze had softened, no longer cold, but still unreadable. Rachel pressed her lips together and nodded back, as if telling herself that this was enough. Just maintain dignity, retreat gracefully, and let the world go back to the way it was. She just sometimes says things she shouldn't. You don't need to feel any sort of obligation. 10 Haas tomorrow, Ethan repeated, voice low and even. Riverside Elementary. Right. She froze, unsure if she'd heard him right. But Lily didn't hesitate. She inhaled, her eyes lit up, and her mouth spread into one of those round, glowing smiles children make when their wish begins to come true. You're really going to come? Ethan looked straight at her. There was something in that little girl's eyes. Not pleading, not insistence, but a strange kind of faith, as if out of all the adults who had passed through her life, only he might be enough. He gave a small nod, then turned to leave, forgetting the bottle of water still sitting unpaid on the counter. Rachel stood motionless, saying nothing. Lily watched him go as if witnessing a miracle passing by. A stranger in an expensive suit had just promised to come to school on the day meant for fathers. Not every man would do that. Not everyone understood that for a 6-year-old who had never held a hand on such a special day, a single promise could change everything. On the walk home, Rachel held her daughter's hand tightly. She didn't dare hope. Children trusted easily. But grown-ups knew the world didn't run on beautiful coincidences. But Lily was different. She held her mother's hand as if she were floating. "Mommy, he'll come." "Right." I saw light in his eyes. Rachel gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "He's probably very busy, sweetheart. We don't want to pressure anyone." "I didn't pressure," Lily replied. "I just asked, but he chose to say yes. That's a choice." That night, Rachel sat sewing the torn sleeve of Lily's little white dress. Lily sat beside her, cutting colored paper, making a small sign that read, "Welcome, Daddy, just for today." Rachel looked at her daughter, a child who had no memory of her father's face, yet somehow knew how to hope gently, how to believe in beauty as if it were instinct. And elsewhere in the city, Ethan Grant stood by the window on the 37th floor, the lights of tall buildings glowing against the collar of his shirt. He looked at his phone. No reminders, no appointments scheduled for the next morning. But in his mind, that little girl's face still lingered, along with the question that had echoed into a hollow place he thought he'd long since locked away. "Could you be my daddy?" Just for one day, Ethan closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he let himself consider going. Not because he had to, but because maybe it might just be the most right thing he'd done in a very, very long time. The next morning, the air in Chicago was crisp and cool. The sun was out, but not enough to melt the thin layer of mist clinging to car windows. Ethan Grant pulled up in front of Riverside Elementary, his hand tightening slightly on the steering wheel. Out of reflex, not nerves. It wasn't anxiety. It was simply that he didn't belong in places like this. No schedules, no meetings, no one nodding after every word he spoke. Just children running around the schoolyard, backpacks bouncing, and fathers in jeans and warm jackets, chatting and laughing like they'd belonged here forever. Ethan stepped out of the car, adjusted his shirt collar, and checked his watch. 9:58, right on time, like everything else he had ever done in his life. Lily ran out to meet him, her white dress fluttering slightly, her hair tied into 2 uneven pigtails with pale yellow ribbons. But her smile was radiant, perfectly aligned with the heart. "You really came," she said like it was a miracle, and then reached out to take his hand without hesitation. Her classroom was on the 2nd floor, decorated with hand-drawn pictures, balloons, and a cardboard sign that read, "Daddy and me, a special day together." Ethan felt like he had stepped into another world. Dads crouched beside their kids, cutting paper, gluing shapes, and reading stories in silly voices filled with love. And him. He was still standing, stiff, out of place. "This is my dad," Lily said loudly, proudly, "just for today." The whole class turned, curious glances, a few raised eyebrows. One mom whispered something to another, but Lily didn't care. She pulled Ethan to the front table and pointed to a wobbly pink paper crown. "You have to wear this. Everyone gets one." Ethan blinked. Really?" "Really," Lily said, rising on her toes and placing the crown on his head like it was the most important ritual of the day. He sat down beside her, holding a green crayon. In front of him was a sheet of paper with the prompt, "Draw what makes you happiest with your dad." Lily began drawing a rainbow. The lines were uneven, but the colors were full of hope. "You draw too," she urged. Ethan, unsure, picked up the crayon and added a little sun. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but because, for the first time in his life, he was doing something not for success, not for gain, but simply to make a child smile. They moved through the activity stations, cutting shapes, ring toss, and blowing soap bubbles at each stop. Lily pulled him along, giving detailed instructions as if she were the host and he, the guest of honor. Every time he gave a polite, hesitant smile, she laughed loud and free, and then he laughed too. Not for show, but because in the middle of all the noise, the mess, and the warmth, for the first time in a very long time, Ethan felt needed. At the end of the morning, Lily led him to the reading corner. She climbed into his lap, placed a book in his hands. "Will you read like a real dad?" Ethan opened to the first page, his voice stiff and formal at first, like he was giving a presentation in a boardroom. But a few lines in, as Lily leaned her head against his chest, he felt his voice soften, melt into the words, into the quiet rhythm of her breathing. And in that moment, he realized right then that the silence in his heart was finally beginning to make sound. Not his own voice, but the voice of a heart slowly opening. The afternoon passed like a pleasant dream, when the rainbow paintings had dried, when the slightly crumpled paper crown still tilted on Ethan's head, and when Lily waved goodbye to each of her classmates like she was the star of the day. Ethan realized he didn't want to leave, not because his schedule was empty, but because of the feeling of having someone reach for his hand, trust him, and say his name in a way no one ever had before. Rachel was waiting outside in the schoolyard. She didn't ask whether he had really come. She just smiled when she saw Lily run toward him, holding his hand. "We usually stop by a little place near home after special days like this," she said, "if you're not busy." Then Ethan didn't answer right away, but he didn't say no either. A small nod, and a few minutes later, they were sitting at a windowside table in a small diner called Willowy's, where soft yellow light spilled over the worn brick walls. Outside, the mist was beginning to settle. Inside, Lily was doodling on a napkin with the colored pens she brought along, chatting excitedly about the Rainbow Kingdom, where her daddy wore a crown and rode a paper horse. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Lily looked up and whispered, "Daddy reads stories better than my teacher." The words weren't loud and weren't clear, but they sank deep. Ethan flinched slightly. Rachel froze, gently setting her glass down. She was about to correct her daughter, but Ethan raised his hand as if asking her not to take it back. "Let it be," he said softly. They were quiet for a while. Lily kept drawing. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that comes when a melody hits its deepest note. Once Ethan began, his eyes on the window where the street lights shimmered in the wind. "I had a little boy. His name was James, curly hair, black as coal, and he always asked questions no one could answer. He wanted to know why rainbows don't fall to the ground, why cats don't cry, and why. I was always busy." Rachel said nothing. She just sat still, one hand resting lightly on the tablecloth as if trying to steady a fragile breath. "My wife's name was Elise," Ethan went on, his voice low and steady. "That day was James's first volcano project at school. He begged me to help, but I had a meeting. I told him I'd make it up next time. Elise took him instead." He paused, his eyes locked on something distant. Their car was hit at the corner of 8th Street. A drunk driver didn't stop in time. No sound came from their side of the table. Only Lily kept drawing, her head tilted slightly, as if even she could feel the shift in the air. Rachel reached out and placed her hand gently over his. No words of comfort, no polite phrases, just her presence. Real, quiet, and wholly without judgment. "I was late," Ethan said, almost like an exhale. "I got to the school when everything was already over." He gave a faint, bitter smile, "And I haven't set foot in a school since that day. Not until today." Beside him, Lily looked up. She put down her crayon, crawled into the seat next to him, and leaned against his arm. "So, you came today because of me." Ethan looked at her, his eyes uncertain, but his voice firmer than it had ever been. "Yes, because of you." And in the soft golden light of that small diner, in the quiet that held just enough space, an old grief no longer screamed. It simply sat. Lighter now because, at last, someone had the patience to listen. Just a few days after that warm evening, Rachel was called into the manager's office at Maple Street Cafe. The middle-aged man with a name tag faded from wear, and eyes that wouldn't meet hers, didn't invite her to sit. He didn't need to say much, just a few clipped lines. "Cold is a pre-printed memo. We've received feedback from customers. There's been talk about you and a high-profile figure in the finance world. It's not appropriate, not good for the cafe's image." Rachel didn't understand. No explanation was clear enough. Only quiet glances, distant head shakes, and sentences cut short as if she were someone scheming for advantage. She walked out of the cafe, still wearing her uniform, but it felt like someone had drained the air from her chest. That afternoon, Rachel sat on a cold wooden bench at the bus stop. The early season wind swept over her thin shoulders, blowing strands of hair across her forehead. Lily nestled beside her, clutching her collar as if sensing something was wrong. The little girl didn't ask. She just rested her head on her mother's arm, quietly waiting. Rachel didn't cry, but her eyes were so dry they burned. Everything had just begun to feel a little brighter. A school celebration, a decent meal, a moment of being heard without judgment. But it turned out the cost of warmth could be painfully real loss. The streetlights came on earlier than usual. Buses passed by, none stopping. And then a familiar car pulled silently to the curb. The door opened before the engine even stopped. Ethan stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit. He carried no briefcase, no gold watch on his wrist like usual, just a man arriving exactly when he was needed. His eyes found Rachel and Lily under the pale glow of the street lamp. He walked over, asked no questions, waited for no explanations. "I got fired," Rachel said softly, her voice void of tears now, "because they saw me having dinner with you. They think I'm trying to get close." I couldn't explain. No one listened. Ethan clenched his hand slightly, his eyes flashing with anger. Not at her, but at the way the world treated kindness like something suspicious. "No one," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "gets to hurt you and your daughter. Not while I'm here." Rachel looked at him. He wasn't the cold CEO from that first day, nor the man in a paper crown in a children's classroom. He was someone choosing to stand beside her, not for reputation, not out of obligation, but simply because he believed it was right. Lily tightened her grip on her mother's hand. She asked gently, "Are you mad because they made Mommy sad?" Ethan bent down, resting a hand lightly on Lily's shoulder. "Yes. Daddy's mad. Daddy's sad. But Daddy's here." And in that fleeting moment, as the late bus turned the corner and pulled into the station, Rachel understood. Despite losing a job, despite being misunderstood, the most important thing remained, not her reputation, but that someone chose to stay. Someone stood by her side without conditions, without needing a reason. 2 days later, a phone call came in early in the morning, just as Rachel was folding her old apron and placing it into a cardboard box, as if she were carefully packing away a chapter of her life that had just closed. Ethan's voice came through the phone. Not the voice of a busy man, but of someone who had thought long and hard before dialing. "Are you free?" he asked. "I'd like you to come to the Grant Initiative. There's something I think you should see." Rachel walked into the tall glass building, wearing faded sneakers, carrying Lily in her arms. She didn't know what to expect, only that the man who said, "I'm here at the bus stop 2 days ago," might really be someone who kept his word. The lobby of the Grant Initiative was gently lit with warm wood interiors and paintings about community, children, and hope. It was nothing like the massive parent company Ethan usually represented, where everything gleamed with metal, glass, and power. This place felt like a softer part of him, the part no one had quite seen. As Rachel stepped through the glass doors, a bright little voice echoed down the hallway. Daddy Lily came running, her steps slightly uneven in her rush. Clutching a stuffed rabbit, hair tousled from the morning scramble, she leapt into Ethan's arms as if they were the safest place in the world. Ethan bent down and caught her, without hesitation, without a glance at the stairs around them. "Did you miss me?" Daddy Lily whispered like a secret. "I always miss you," Ethan answered, his voice so gentle that even Rachel paused. He turned to her, a flicker of hesitation in his expression, then handed her a sheet of paper. "I need an assistant for the foundation. Not someone who just knows the job, but someone who truly cares about people." "I think that's you." Rachel looked at the job description, then looked at Ethan. "I don't want to be someone who owes you." "Then don't see it as a debt," he replied softly. "See it as a chance for both of us." There was no fancy contract, no speech or promises, just a quiet understanding in their eyes, and a little girl wrapping her arms around her mother's legs, looking up and saying, "This place is so pretty. "Mommy, work here." "Okay." From that day on, Rachel began her mornings in a small office with a cup of warm tea and reports about homeless children in need of support. Ethan passed by her desk a few times each day, not to check on her work, but to offer a quiet glance, as if he was learning how to be present without having to be in charge. In the afternoons, Lily was often picked up a little later. She'd sit in the corner of the conference room, coloring, reading, or sometimes climbing into Ethan's lap while he was still on a call. No one said they were a family, but everyone saw it. One day, while Rachel was gathering up some files, she heard Lily speaking to someone in the elevator. "That's my daddy. My mommy works here too. We're a team." And Rachel realized sometimes a family doesn't need declarations. It doesn't need a wedding, a birth certificate, or binding agreements. Family can begin with a cup of tea, a hug, a simple question. "Did you miss me, Daddy?" And an answer that tells your heart you finally belong. It was a cold, rainy Friday afternoon. Tiny droplets tapped against the office windows when Rachel got the call from school. Lily wasn't feeling well. She hadn't eaten lunch. Her cheeks were flushed and she'd gone limp during art class. Rachel rushed out immediately, and when Ethan saw her storm through the lobby with panic in her eyes, he left his meeting mid-sentence and followed. No questions, just presence. They brought Lily back to Rachel's small apartment. The living room was dark, lit only by the faint kitchen light glowing through damp curtains. Rachel laid her daughter down on the bed, placing a cool cloth on her forehead. Ethan sat beside them, and her skin was burning, hot as rising ash. The fever had come fast and fierce, leaving them both breathless. Rachel called the doctor, mixed medicine, sponged her down. She moved with the instincts of a mother who had weathered many seasons of sickness. Ethan just sat quietly by the bed, unsure of what to do, but refusing to leave. Lily dozed fitfully, sweat dampening her hair, lips dry, her little hand reaching out for warmth. After a while, she whimpered in her sleep, then suddenly whispered, a voice so faint and aching it pierced the room. "Don't leave me like everyone else." The words cut deep, sharp, and sudden. Ethan froze, his heart squeezed tight by invisible hands. He leaned down, touched her shoulder, and whispered, "Daddy's here." "I'm not going anywhere." But Lily called out again, this time barely more than a breath. "Daddy, don't go." And Ethan, the man who hadn't cried at his wife's funeral, who hadn't shed a tear at his son's grave, began to cry silently, quietly, like a dam inside had finally burst. He held Lily close, his hand trembling as it stroked her back, his tears soaking into her tiny shirt, one drop at a time. Not out of fear of losing her, but because he realized he had already fallen in love. A love unguarded, a love without conditions, a love written not in words but in presence. Rachel stepped into the doorway and froze. She saw it all. Ethan holding her daughter like he was holding an entire life he'd once lost. And in his eyes there was no space left between stranger and family. She said nothing, just walked over, placed a hand on his shoulder, and sat beside him. 3 people, no words. But in that small room, something immense had happened. By dawn, the fever began to break. Lily slept soundly, her forehead dry, lips gently moving like she was dreaming something softer. Ethan was still there, her tiny hand locked in his. His eyes were red, his shirt wrinkled, but his face was strangely peaceful. He looked up at Rachel, his voice raspy like someone who'd walked through a storm. "I once lost a child, because I didn't know how to stay. This time I'm not going anywhere." And with that promise, a piece of the past that had long kept Ethan's heart locked away finally began to unfasten. Not with fear, but with a love brave enough to begin again. Even if late, it was still in time. It was something shifted after that long night. Not through declarations or vows, but in the way Ethan placed his hand gently on Rachel's back while she made breakfast. In the way he tied Lily's shoelaces, always too tight the first time, then undone and tied again. In the way the 3 of them sat up reading an old book past midnight, just because Lily pleaded. "One more page. Daddy." But fragile happiness sometimes wakes sleeping things. Daniel Monroe, the younger brother of Rachel's late husband, showed up one Sunday morning. He came in a sharp suit with a voice dressed in principle, but eyes too cold for someone familiar with children. I heard there's a strange man living in my niece's life. He said, I can't look the other way. Rachel stood in the doorway, her hand clenched tightly. You've never come, she said. 6 years and Lily has never once heard your name. That's exactly why, Daniel replied. I want to make it right. She needs real family. Blood, not a temporary attachment to a man she barely knows. News that Daniel had filed for custody spread fast. Rachel was terrified, though not surprised. She'd lived long enough to know that when happiness begins to bloom, someone is always ready to question it. The hearing was set for an early winter morning. The courtroom was cold and still, mirroring the tension in Rachel's chest. Ethan sat beside her, saying little. He only held her hand tightly as if to remind her that this time he wasn't leaving. Daniel stood in front, arguing with all the right words: bloodlines, stability, traditional values. He pointed at Ethan, calling him an outsider, a case of misplaced emotions, a wealthy man with no experience raising a child. The judge frowned. No one spoke up. No one could until a small voice rose from the back of the room. Can I say something? Everyone turned. Lily stood there. Cream-colored dress, slightly wrinkled, her hair tied unevenly, and those wide blue eyes, fearless. The judge nodded. She walked forward, each step small but steady, and stood in the middle of the courtroom where adults had spoken of her as if she were an object. My name is Lily Monroe, she said, her voice so clear it quieted the entire room. And I've already chosen my daddy. Daniel fell silent. Ethan swallowed hard. Rachel couldn't breathe. My daddy reads to me every night, Lily continued. He doesn't yell. He doesn't leave. He's not blood. But he's the only one who stayed. No one dared interrupt. Even the judge said nothing, simply watching her as if he had just witnessed something rare, something no legal document could capture true love. I don't need a relative I've never met, Lily said softly. I need the one who was there, when I had a fever, when my drawings were bad, when I was sad. And that's my daddy. A long, still moment passed. Finally, the judge nodded. The court recognizes the stable and loving relationship between the child and Mr. Ethan Grant. The custody petition is denied. The breath Rachel had held burst free in her chest. Lily turned to Ethan and ran to him, flinging herself into his arms without hesitation, and Ethan, for the first time in his life, felt chosen. Not for his competence, not for his status, but by a child who had seen straight into his heart and called it home with a love that asked for nothing in return. A week after the court hearing, Rachel's little house was filled with late autumn sunlight and the scent of cinnamon apple pie that Lily had helped her bake. Everything seemed to have settled. No more fear. No more knocks on the door with custody papers. Ethan came by most evenings, sometimes bringing a small toy for Lily, sometimes just offering a hug, a glance that said everything without needing words. That morning, Rachel received a letter from the Northwind Institute in Minneapolis. The envelope was thick, the print crisp, but her hand still trembled as she opened it. It was for a position she had once dreamed of as a student, a research program focused on language development for disadvantaged children, exactly her field, one she had long abandoned for survival. She stood quietly by the window, the letter in her hands, eyes watching Lily ride her bike in the yard, the yellow ribbon fluttering behind her. Ethan stepped up behind her silently, the way he had somehow learned to do without her ever asking. Good news, he asked gently, though her voice didn't sound like someone who just received good news. Northwind offered me a position, she said softly. It's official, a livable salary, a good environment, the work I love. But he waited, saying nothing. But I don't want to give up what I have here. I don't want to leave Chicago, leave you, uproot Lily from the place she calls home. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He looked at her for a moment, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low and steady. Don't give up your dream. Take it with you. Rachel turned and tears rose unexpectedly in her eyes. But what if we're no longer a family? Ethan smiled, a smile no longer holding back. Then let me answer that question tonight. That evening, he invited Rachel and Lily to the rooftop of the Grant Initiative building. The space was lit with soft strings of golden lights wrapped around bougainvillea vines. On a small wooden table were 3 plates, a jar of wildflowers, and Lily's favorite musique. In the center of the table, Ethan placed a small box. "This one's for you," he said to Lily, handing her an ivory cold box. She opened it, her eyes lighting up at the sight of a delicate silver necklace with a tiny heart-shaped pendant. Engraved on it were the words, "Family Forever." "You taught me," Ethan said, his voice catching slightly. "That family isn't something you're given. It's something you choose to keep, and I want you to know, no matter where you are, whether we live in Minneapolis or Chicago, you'll always be my family." Lily threw her arms around his neck, whispering, "I'm never taking it off, not even for a bath." Rachel laughed through her tears, and in that moment, Ethan turned to her, taking out a second box. No grand lights, no music, just a quiet night, and a proposal spoken with everything he had ever kept silently in his heart. "I used to be afraid of commitment," he said. "Used to believe love was something easily lost. But you and Lily, you two taught me that some things are worth not being afraid of because they're worth holding on to." He opened the box. A simple ring. No flash, just honesty. "Rachel Monroe, will you take your dream with you, along with the family you chose?" Rachel nodded through her tears. Lily clapped her hands and shouted, "So, I'm the bridesmaid, right? Or maybe the tiny flower queen?" Ethan laughed, never taking his eyes off the woman in front of him, the one who had walked through loneliness and loss and still chose to love again. This time for good. 6 weeks after the rooftop proposal, a gentle, crisp morning unfolded as if written just for this day. The little house where 3 people had shared dinners, story-filled nights, and fevered midnights was now filled with the scent of jasmine and soft laughter drifting from the kitchen. There was no grand wedding venue, no guest list as long as a quarterly report, just the people who truly mattered. A few close friends, a handful of old co-workers, and the familiar faces who had witnessed their journey through every small quiet moment. Lily was the first to walk down the sunlit aisle. Her white dress fluttered, her hair neatly tied back with the same yellow ribbon Ethan had fastened himself. She held a basket of petals, tossing them with cheerful waves to everyone in the room. Every step she took seemed to fill in all the empty years before, and no one could look away from the joy shining on her face. Ethan waited at the end of the aisle in a navy suit, not perfectly pressed, but with eyes warm like spring after a long, long winter. And when Rachel entered, her ivory dress softly hugging her slender frame, he held his breath, not because of how she looked, but because of her gaze, so tender it made him believe that every wound could heal if someone simply stayed. They didn't read vows from paper. Each said only one thing from the heart. "There was a time I thought I had missed it all," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. "But you and your daughter showed me it's never too late for a second chance." Rachel smiled, her hand tightening and his eyes glistening. "I used to think love meant giving things up, sacrifice. But you've shown me, sometimes love is simply someone choosing to stay." Every single day, Lily stepped between them without being told, grabbing both their hands, her head tilted up proudly like the official matchmaker. "So now I've got 2 people who love me for real." "Right." Laughter rang out. The whole room seemed to melt at her words. That evening, there was no live band, just the warm golden light of the living room, a soft rug beneath their feet, and an old radio playing a nameless tune. Lily tugged on Ethan's hand, then turned to her mom. "Let's dance." Ethan reached out. Rachel placed her hand in his, and the 3 of them turned slowly together in a room that had once held so much worry. No perfect waltz, no choreographed steps, but every hand held, every tilt of the head, every burst of laughter between the broken lyrics felt just right, felt true. Lily rested her head on Ethan's shoulder and whispered, "I picked the right one, didn't I, Daddy?" He gently squeezed her hand, glanced at the woman resting against him, and whispered back, "The right one at the right time." None of them were born into the same family, but they had chosen each other through little things, through patience, through the courage to forgive, to begin again, to believe one more time. And in a world that's always rushing, always letting go too quickly, some things can still stay with a whisper, a hand to hold, a gaze that never looks away. I hope this story made you smile today.